Good afternoon and welcome to the Sacramento Bee's debate between the candidates seeking to be District Attorney of Sacramento County, Alana Mathews and Thien. My name is Marcos Bertone. I'm the California Opinion Editor for the Sacramento Bee and McClatchy. And for the next hour, I will be your host and moderator for what we expect will be a compelling give and take between two distinctly different candidates running for DA in Sacramento. No matter who wins this debate and no matter who wins this election, the next DA of Sacramento will be historic. Voters will choose the first person of color ever to run a century-old agency responsible for prosecuting people charged with crimes, seeking justice for crime victims, and creating rehabilitation opportunities when possible. At this moment, violent crime has been on the rise in Sacramento County. Our community has been torn by not one, but two mass shootings in recent months. We've experienced large public demonstrations decrying police violence in Sacramento. The job of being Sacramento's DA has been daunting in any era, but in this era of cell phone cameras, a radical realignment of our state prison system, and the impacts these forces have had on our community, an argument can be made that the next DA of Sacramento will inherit a job that has never been more demanding and complex. Before we begin, a word about our format. This debate is being aired live on sacbee.com and on the Bee's Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube platforms. Bee readers have submitted questions that will be put to the candidates. The questions will be posed by members of the Sacramento Bee editorial board, which was honored last week by the Sacramento Press Club for its coverage of the California recall. As the moderator, I will be your polite but persistent nag whose job it is to keep the candidates from speaking too long or not answering questions. Beginning with Alana Mathews, the candidates will each get a 3-minute opening statement, and then the questions will begin. Candidates, as you speak, please keep an eye on the chat that only the participants can see. I will be alerting you when you have 30 seconds left and then 10. Please heed the prompts so we can keep the program moving. And with that, let's begin. Alana Mathews, you have 3 minutes to introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us why you should be the DA. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marcos, and the editorial board for this opportunity. You know, I grew up in a community that was defined by high crime, gun violence, gang violence, rape, murders, homicides. And it was so bad that my parents only allowed me to hang out with my pastor and my youth group. Unfortunately, one day, while we were all hanging out laughing, a lowrider vehicle drove right past us. We didn't pay much attention to it until it slammed on its brakes. The tires screeched. It backed up and it opened fire. It was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had, not knowing if your last breath is the one you're going to take next. I learned that day that I may not be safe no matter where I am in the city, no matter my parents' efforts to keep me safe. And a few years later, when I had an opportunity to go to a college preparatory school where I thought I'd be starting a bright new future in a more safer community, I went on a walk and I was accosted and attacked by a truckload of guys who came to me and called me the N word, the B word, and told me to go back to Africa. Again, I faced an unimaginable terror as I ran for my life back to campus, going through the campus doors, out of breath and in tears, telling the administrators what happened to me, and their response was, "You shouldn't have been walking alone." I share those two experiences because I learned two things. Number one, I may not be safe no matter where I live. And number two, the criminal justice system may not be available to me because the police were never called, not even an incident report was filed. I'm running for Sacramento County DA because I believe everybody ought to feel safe no matter where they live, work, and raise their family. And the criminal justice system ought to be available to everybody at every time, but it's not. We normalize crime in certain communities and against certain crimes of victims. And also, the criminal justice system has missed critical opportunities to keep our community safe. That's why we're seeing such a spike in violent crime. We have an epidemic of homelessness, mental illness, and substance abuse. I'm running for a DA because I have the broad experience in the courtroom, in the community, in the Capitol, and in the classroom of bringing solutions to problems. And I want to be your next DA because I want to handle the problem of crime by prioritizing violent and serious criminals, not only prioritizing those offenders, but prosecuting them vigorously. But I also have new ideas to bring targeted solutions for those who are experiencing homelessness, substance abuse, and mental illness to direct them to the treatment and the services that they need. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to sharing with you more solutions that I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thien Ho, your 3-minute opening statement, please.
Thank you, first of all, to the SACB and the editorial board for this opportunity. So I was born in Vietnam, and in 1975, when South Vietnam fell to the communist North, my family experienced injustice when the communists came in and arrested my uncle, who worked for the South Vietnamese government. Without a judge, without a jury, without a prosecutor, he was sent to a re-education camp in the jungle where he was tortured for 7 years. So in 1976, when I was a child, my parents, myself, and my brother, we escaped Vietnam on a tiny fishing boat. My dad wore a uniform from a communist officer that he stole and a fake gun that he had painted. We ran out of gas, food, and water. We were just drifting on the ocean near death until we were rescued. We came to this country with nothing but the clothes on our back. I learned how to speak English from watching Bugs Bunny cartoons and going to ESL class. 22 years later, I graduated from the University of California at Davis and then from the George Law School. I've been a prosecutor for 2 decades. I am an experienced prosecutor. I'm running for Sacramento DA because I want to make sure, and I have been making sure for the last 20 years, that you are safe. Not only do you feel safe, but that the community is safe. Safe where you work, safe where you raise your children, safe where you walk your kids to school or to the park. I have the experience in the courtroom because I've tried nearly 100 jury trials, everything from your homicide cases to your gang shootings to your sex offenses. I prosecuted the most complex, victim-sensitive case that this county has ever seen, the East Area Rapist and the Golden State Killer. So in addition to my experience in the courtroom, I have the experience in the executive room. As an assistant chief in the DA's office right now in Sacramento, I help manage the budget of a 432 employee office, 175 prosecutors. I have the experience in the executive room, having supervised nearly 100 prosecutors. I have the experience in the community, working with community-based organizations to try to prevent crime and try to intervene and stop the school to prison pipeline. I'm running for district attorney because I want to make sure that you are safe. I want to target and make sure that we continue to prosecute serious and violent felonies like rape, murder, and gun offenses, which I have personally done. But in addition to that, I want to make sure that we address the homeless crisis, because the homeless crisis has 3 elements to it. It has housing, but it also has mental health and drug addiction. And for the last several years, I've been working with the county and the city to try to deal with those very issues, bringing people together. And as the next district attorney, I will make sure that all communities are safe and secure, and that all people are treated equally. I have the experience in the courtroom, in the executive room, in the classroom, and in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Thien Ho, very much. Okay, so our questions will now begin, and leading us off will be Colleen Nelson, Executive Editor of the Sacramento Bee. Colleen?
Thank you, Marcos, and welcome to both of our candidates. So the primary job of the district attorney, of course, is to prosecute crimes, but I would like to ask you this. Does the DA also have a responsibility to help curb crime or prevent crimes from happening? And I'll go ahead and add my follow-up question to that. If you don't agree with that, if you don't agree that the DA has a role to play in reducing crime, why not? And if you do agree that the DA has a role to play, what specific ideas would you offer for initiatives that aren't already in place to curb or prevent crime? So let's start with Thien Ho. You have 3 minutes to answer.
First of all, I do agree. I think the first and foremost thing that the duty and the responsibility of the district attorneys is always public safety. And one of the things that I have experienced is I'm the only candidate for DA that has prosecuted and tried a homicide case, sex crimes, and domestic violence, and those types of cases in terms of murders, gang shootings. But beyond that, we have to make sure that people are held accountable. They are held accountable for the violent crimes that they commit. It is absolutely essential, and it begins with accountability. But it goes beyond that. What we need to do is we also need to work upstream with prevention and intervention so that we prevent crimes from happening later in time downstream. And so what are some of the things that we can do and continue to do with that? So for example, for the last several years, I've worked with Mervyn Brookins. Mervyn Brookins run a CBO, a community-based organization known as Brother to Brother. And what that organization does is it works with particularly men of color, people who are engaged in criminal activity, but that are trying to turn their life around with mentorship programs. And so I've been working with Mervyn Brookins, and I've also worked with the Wellness Foundation, Gina Warren as well. But in addition to that, some of the policies and ideas that I have in regards to intervention and prevention is this. 1/3 of all kids who are in the foster care system, they're in the dependency and delinquency system. What happens when they time out of the system? They become homeless. And so what we need to do is have an apprenticeship program in our juvenile system. I've actually spoken to and working in the process with the building trades, the plumbers and pipe fitters, the sheet metal workers. And what we're trying to do is bring an apprenticeship program into the juvenile system. When CYA or DGJ was closed down and inmates who were juveniles were being transferred back to Sacramento County, one of the things that we need to do is have rehabilitative programs to try to intervene and prevent, not only in the criminal justice system, but outside of that as well, working with the community-based organizations. And that is one example of what we can do to try to deal with in terms of treatment, mental health, and the intervention as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the same question to Alana Mathews, and you have 3 minutes as well.
Thank you. I absolutely agree. That is the role of the DA, not only to prosecute and find justice in criminal cases, but it's also the role of the DA to prevent crime. And I would also submit that there's a third role, and that is to be a trusted leader among the diverse communities that you serve. So when we say prevention and intervention, it shouldn't just be a term that we're throwing out there. The reason why you have prevention and intervention is because you want to address the root causes of crime. So absolutely, there's 2 prongs where you can look at this. Your role as DA in finding justice in criminal cases, you're reacting to crime. You're prosecuting it in the courtroom. But what we have to focus on is prevention and intervention to prevent crime from happening in the first place. And what we have not seen from the leadership in the DA's office, the policies or the practices, is really prevention and intervention. Working with 1 program or 2 programs in one neighborhood is not preventing crime. And we know that because of the headlines that we keep reading every single day. So when we're in an election season, it's great to have all these promises and ideas, but we have to ask ourselves, if that's something that we're committed to, why hasn't it already been done? Even when you talk about helping at-risk youth, when you talk about helping youth who are in the foster care system or youth who are looking to be rehabilitated or working with individuals, you're still reacting to crime. That is the single tool and focus of the Sacramento DA's office. It has not been on prevention and intervention. If you want to stop a 30-year-old man from beating his wife, you talk to him when he's 10. So the ideas that I have will go into what are we doing in the elementary schools? What programs do we have? What is the presence that the DA has in the community to offer resources? And are we sitting at the table where they're discussing employment, where they're discussing housing, to make sure we have opportunities that are addressing crime? I'm a law professor. And not only am I just, that's a title that we have, but it means I do the research and I do the studies. And so there's drivers of violence. So when we're talking about these prevention and intervention programs, are they addressing the drivers of violence? Are they dealing with how an individual deals with shame or disrespect? Are they dealing with the needs of an individual? It doesn't do you any good to have a program if you don't have transportation to get a person there. It doesn't matter if you have a prevention or intervention program and the people don't trust you or know who you are. So the opportunity that we have now is actually to have a presence in the community. My ideas of having a youth court and things that I've already been doing, which is mentoring women who have been in prison and mentoring at-risk youth, which my first mentee actually was sworn into the bar last February, and my second mentee graduated from law school and will be studying for the bar fairly soon. Those are programs that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And, we have a script, but I want to leave some room for some follow-up questions. So Thien, you heard Alana just talk about the shortcomings of the DA's office. You're obviously not the DA right now, but as someone who has been with the DA's office for a long time, what do you say about the criticism that the DA's office traditionally has not done enough in terms of youth crime, that the DA's office has funneled its best prosecutors like yourself into gangs, into homicides, and that not enough attention has been paid to youth crimes? Has that been a mistake in the past? And would you make that a priority as a DA?
Two things. First of all, in terms of answering that last question, I was the only individual that actually provided a specific example of something that I would actually do, which is the apprenticeship program. But in regards to what we do in the office, in regards to community engagement and engagement in the youth, I'll give you some examples of things that we are doing in the youth areas. We have a crime lab youth shadow day. We have a criminal justice youth shadow day as well. We have a youth academy that is a 10-week long program that we're engaging in youth in the community, trying to introduce them to the criminal justice system in a positive manner, where we're going back upstream earlier to try to educate them, put them in contact with good role models, whether it's with probation, whether it's with defense attorneys, the court, whether it's with the DA's office. We have the gun violence information for teen program, where we're talking about trying to intervene and prevent gun violence that we have in the school. We have the Luther Burbank Youth Academy as well. We also have an app that we use to connect youth and community members to different services that are available. But one of the things that I'm proposing that we talk about here, Marcos, is really adding in that apprenticeship program for those that are in our juvenile system. And in addition to that, I believe that we should have a neighborhood court that is centered on with juveniles in terms of getting them out of the criminal justice system and having accountability and credibility and mental health, and working with many different programs, such as with Paris Dye Impact SAC. I've been working with her program for several years now to reach out and to intervene with kids. So there are things that I have done, will continue to do, and we will expand upon.
Great, thank you. Alana, just a quick response.
Yeah, I would say, again, those are all things that are reactionary when we're talking about working with youth who are already in the system, or they're the check the box approach. So when we look at the conditions that actually lead to youth or adults engaging in criminal conduct, it's a lot of times the root causes, which is unemployment, lack of education, trauma that's being happening in their lives. And so we're not addressing that. Bringing students into the DA's office to tell them the different court process is not creating a pathway. So what I'm talking about doing is what I've already been doing. The Floor and Law Academy, where we are building pathways out of poverty to have a more holistic approach to build a better life. When I've mentored as a DA, women who were on parole, it means that I took the 3 a.m. calls. We helped them achieve sobriety. We helped them continue their education. We helped them find stability and housing. So unless you're looking holistically at the conditions that lead to an environment where someone may commit crime, you're not addressing the root causes and you're not preventing it. You're just reacting to it. You're checking the boxes. And as we can see, the proof is in the pudding. Where are we right now? How many of the youth that have gone through the youth academy have actually not been involved in or was previously involved in the system? How can we show that actually intervened in their lives?
Well, I think the next question will lead into a continued discussion about this. So with the next question will be Josh Golke, Deputy Opinion Editor from the Sacramento Bee. Josh? Did we lose Josh? Okay. Well, I will ask the question. So this is a question in two parts First, this is for both candidates. What specifically has current DA Anne Marie Schubert done wrong? And second, what specifically would you do to reverse what she has done wrong? Let's start with Alana Mathews. You have 3 minutes. And remember to please be specific in your answers to both questions. To both of you, please no filibustering or storytelling. We're looking for specific answers. Alana, you have 3 minutes.
So the first is I would prioritize gun violence. That means we need to get guns out of the hands of those who should not have them, primarily abusers. And there are other jurisdictions in California where we know the honor system isn't working and they have a system in place. So there are 3 things that I would do. Number 1 is I want to make sure that we have a team of attorneys and work with law enforcement. So when we have restraining orders that are issued and an individual is not supposed to have a gun, we will get that gun out of their hands and get it away from abusers. Secondly, we need to target ghost guns. We need to step up the era. This is an issue that has been plaguing our community for at least a decade, but it has not been a priority. And I would work with the Attorney General or our other state partners to make sure we address the problem of ghost guns. And then thirdly, we need to do education about our red flag laws so people understand and are empowered when they have a family member or someone that they know that they have a process where they can get the guns out of the hands of someone who should not have them. Secondly, what I would be doing differently is recognizing that we've had very little accountability for police misconduct. And as the DA, I believe that anybody who breaks the law should be held accountable, no matter the position you hold, how much money you make, or the uniform you wear. Now, I want to be clear. This is the most pro-police action that I can take because it does not undermine constitutional policing and officers who are putting on that uniform every single day and going out there and protecting and serving. We're only talking about those who commit misconduct, and we have not seen the level of accountability. I go to the Joseph Mann case where we've had videotape and the Sacramento Police Department said the line was crossed with the actions of that officer, but the Sacramento DA's office did not. And thirdly, what I would do is prioritize violence against women. I believe in a report that the death review team showed is that over the last 2 years of all the domestic violence referrals that have been referred to that office, less than half were actually filed. These are women who actually came forward and said, I'm in trouble and I need help, but they were not helped. So what I would do differently is prioritize violence against women, and I would not use the tool of incarcerating everybody. Certainly, violent and serious offenders, they need to be locked up, but not everybody. Those experiencing homelessness, mental illness, and substance abuse who are low-level offenders, we need to divert them to treatment and services.
Thank you. All right, Tin Ho. So what has Anne Marie Schubert done wrong, and what would you do to change it? 3 minutes, please.
Well, I really want to talk about what I want to do in terms of the future of the DA's office. So one of the things that I would want to do and that I intend on doing is creating and reestablishing a community advisory council made up of people from diverse communities in diverse areas, from many different parts of the county. And that committee would have, and that council would have a direct contact and meeting with the district attorney, with myself, so that we can hear from, engage from, and learn from the community and have that relationship. I think that's important to establish. And so I would like to establish, and I would establish, a diverse community council, a kitchen cabinet, as you would say, in regards to the district attorney's office and the community. In regards to gun violence, you know, one of the things that we have, and we've definitely seen an uptick across the country on gun violence. And I know my opponent mentioned a few things in terms of restraining orders and prioritizing gun violence, but I want to inform our public, for those of you who may not know this, in regards to getting guns away from those with a restraining order. My office, when there's a domestic violence case, and our attorneys that deal with domestic violence in those type of cases go through a risk assessment, a really thorough risk assessment. And we partner with law enforcement to get those guns out of their hands. And in fact, Some people may not realize this, but there is a unit within law enforcement, within the sheriff's department. Their job is when they take those restraining orders to work with us and to work within them, to go out, to contact those individuals in their homes, in their apartments, in their residence, in their workplace, to serve them with that restraining order and to get the gun. And when we're talking about gun violence, and we have definitely seen an uptick on that, one of the things I want to talk about and what we need to address is this: stealing a gun. And the vast majority of these crimes, and I'm sure it'll come up again, the vast majority of gun violence that happens in our community comes from guns that are stolen. Not guns that are purchased legally, but guns that are stolen. And we're talking about guns that are stolen and stealing those guns. What we need to do is make sure that that offense is a felony, that there is accountability on that end. Because unless it's $950 and above, it's a misdemeanor. And if it's a misdemeanor, it's the same class of crime as stealing a garden hose that's worth $20. And so we will continue to make sure that we enforce gun laws, but I want to engage in the community and build relationships and build bridges with all communities.
Thank you very much. And I will say first, that there's nothing like live television. And secondly, that our friend Josh Golke, unfortunately, is having computer issues, which leads me to my final point before I move on, is that I cannot wait until we can gather together at the same place and have a real debate when we're all in the same room. So I look forward to that, hopefully this fall. Our next question, and I hope she's there, will come from Robin Epley, opinion writer from the Sacramento Bee. Robin will be reading a question submitted by a reader. Robin?
I'm here. This question is from JP in Elk Grove. When Chesa Boudin ran for San Francisco District Attorney in 2019, he said crime was caused by poverty, wealth inequality, and inadequate government spending on social programs. He called prostitution, open drug use, and drug dealing victimless crimes, and promised not to prosecute them. With crime and homelessness proliferating in our region, would you manage these issues as Boudin has? Do you agree with his approach? Or if you disagree, how will you manage these issues differently in Sacramento? Let's start with Tinho.
I would not handle it the way that San Francisco has handled it. I've been up to San Francisco recently, about a month ago, and I visited with a gentleman. His name was Tom. Tom was a worker for the city of San Francisco. He ended up having surgery, got addicted to drugs. Next thing he knows, he's homeless on the street, lost both his kids, his wife, and his home. And so by the time I met him, he was recovered. And he showed me the Tenderloin District in San Francisco on our tour. And what we need here when we're talking about homelessness, and I do not want to criminalize in any way homelessness, we need to address our homeless crisis in 3 different ways. There is obviously a housing component, but the other 2 components that we need to address is mental health and drug addiction. That plays a huge role. Whether homelessness causes it or it causes homelessness, drug addiction, and mental health, it's still there nonetheless, and we need to deal with it. So how do we deal with it? There's a couple things that we have to do when we're dealing with homelessness and drug addiction and mental health. But one of the things when the district attorney is involved is this: we get people that are released from the jail, and they have to be released within a certain number of hours. And I'll give an example of what we're doing. From a certain number of hours. And so they're released 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, and they don't have services, and they're homeless, and they have no contact, and they're just there. So I work together to create a working group with the Board of Supervisor, the county executive, the Sheriff's Department, and the Public Defender's Office and Behavioral Mental Health. And what we're doing is embedding a person inside the jail with behavioral health to do an assessment there. I've also contacted the Exodus Project, a community-based organization that deals with wraparound services. And one of the ideas that we're working on right now is to create a 24-hour reception area right by the jail. So that somebody is released, they get transported, they get over there, they get temporary housing, and in addition, they get wraparound services at that point in time, because there's a small window to deal with the mental health and drug addiction and create those programs. In the DA's office, we also have a program called the CORE program, that when an individual has committed crimes, it could be vandalism, trespassing, assault, battery. What happens is, in lieu of doing the jail time in those cases, they're offered an opportunity to do mental health and drug addiction. And if they do so, they get transported. And we had a gentleman just recently get into that program. And if they complete the program, they don't do any jail time, but instead they are put on probation. And now what we have to do is work with our community to get transitional housing for them. But we have to deal with the mental health and drug addiction. And we have to deal with that in a cohesive way.
Thank you very much. Alana Mathews, the same question to you.
Yeah, so first I want to say that I don't think San Francisco should be the standard by which we address the crime problems that we have in Sacramento. But to answer the question, I would say that I have not focused on how he is doing it, so I can't say that I would agree. But what I will say is that I didn't go to San Francisco to find a homeless person and talk to them. I've been walking the streets of Sacramento. I had an opportunity to participate in the point in time count where I got to talk to the people who are experiencing homelessness right here in our community. And what I learned is that although there is a lot of mental health and substance abuse, a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness include the elderly, women who are escaping an abusive environment, disabled. We're looking at veterans, we're looking at foster youth, transgender youth, and those who are re-entering society. So although a poll may tell you, or a broad brush of saying there are three main points that we deal with, that's not going to work, because those who are experiencing homelessness are not a monolith. And we have to have targeted solutions that address the conditions that each of them face. Now, what I will say to answer your question with regard to low-level offenders and sex workers is that I think we have to first address the root causes of crime, so that we're not just waiting for individuals who are going to be released from jail before we can, provide services for them. I think we can be proactive, because number one, those experiencing homelessness are more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators of crime. And what we know is that crime happens among those who are experiencing homelessness before it happens in the broader community. And right now, they don't have anyone who is protecting them and looking out for them. I think what I would do differently is make sure we have a relationship so that we are building trust in those communities to get them the services they're needing and not waiting till they commit crimes. Now, actually, if they do commit crime and they are brought, certainly we can direct them and divert them into treatment and services of what they have. But I think we have to be just as diligent in making sure we're addressing the underlying needs that cause them to deal with homelessness, cause them to have mental health issues or substance abuse problems, to make sure we're having targeted solutions, not only to address the problem, but to prevent crime and keep our community safe.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, the next question comes from Yusef Beg, Assistant Opinion Editor for the Sacramento Bee. Yusef?
Hi, good evening, guys. I want to ask a couple of candidate-specific questions. And first one is to you, Alana. Obviously, there's no denying the success you've attained over your career, but some critics argue that you don't have enough experience in the courtroom to be a district attorney. When you served as a deputy district attorney, could you share with viewers how often you were in the courtroom and what sort of cases you handled?
Yeah, so I was a deputy DA. I worked in that office, starting off as an intern for 2 years and another 8 years as a line prosecutor. I started off prosecuting misdemeanor jury trials. I did a rotation through our juvenile hall, domestic violence, our preliminary hearing unit, even to our felony trial team. And in each rotation, I was given the most serious and complex cases, including home invasion, robbery, and attempt murder. The last trial assignment I had was in a special unit dealing with our prison crimes, so crimes that happen in prison. I have had approximately 50 jury and court trials that I have tried to verdict or adjudication. But what I will say is that the problem that we have in the DA's office is not with the courtroom experience. And the DA does not actually go into court and try cases. It has actually been in that prong of prevention and intervention. And that's why my experience as an executive leader being appointed by the governor, not in the title that I had, but actually driving organizational change, building a statewide coalition. So I won't talk about creating an advisory board. I've actually created an advisory board. It's not something that I want to do. I've already done it. And I did it for multiple agencies and built consensus among stakeholder groups. I've also had experience in the Capitol as the chief consultant of the Climate Change Committee. So when we're talking about expanding mental health programs or substance abuse, where is the money going to come from? How are we going to make this happen? So my experience in the legislature brings key in-depth experience with working with the governor's office, working with legislators, not because I'm going and testifying at a hearing. I've actually created the hearings. That requires someone to look ahead. What are the issues? What are the trends? Again, because we don't want to be reacting to policy issues that arise. We want to be proactive against it. And that's the experience that I had in the legislature. Also working with our budget process by simply, commenting or giving feedback on a bill that you've reviewed that doesn't qualify as experience of understanding how do we work with legislatures to make policy and laws that are actually going to keep our community safe. And then lastly, I think my key experience is my experience in the community, not when I've just been working with one or two different people in programs, but I've actually provided results. I've talked about mentoring women on parole and at-risk youth and building pathways. What's key about that is that I have experience transforming lives, not just protecting them. And that's what we're going to need to make our region safe again. I know this because I grew up in a high crime community. And then the last thing I'll say is I have experience in the in the classroom, not just by teaching a class focused on trial advocacy, but teaching a course that brought the law school into the community to address issues we're facing, such as alternatives to 911, housing issues, and those at risk of becoming homeless.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alana. And Thien, you have a pretty cold-blooded reputation among some defense attorneys, and your aggressive posture as a prosecutor has clearly served you well over your career. But is that the kind of DA that you're going to be, someone that can go for the throat?
Well, first of all, when you look at in terms of the relationships with the other partners in the criminal justice system, I have a great relationship with them. When you look at example, there's a union that represents both the public defender's office and the district attorney's office. I receive the overwhelming support of that organization, including many public defenders. I have people that have endorsed me that are defense attorneys that are prominent in the community, including Johnny Griffith, one of the most prominent African-American attorneys and defense attorneys in town, both on the federal state level. And in regards to working with judges, I've been endorsed by nearly a dozen retired judges, both on the Superior Court and on the 3rd District Court of Appeal as well. And so I think that is reflective of the collaborative sort of relationship that I have with different partners in our criminal justice system. And that is also reflective of the fact that, going back to the previous question that Robin asked and that I brought up, I created a working group, essentially involving the public defender's office as well, the interim public defender, where we're sitting there at a table talking about what we can do for people that are being released from the county jail in the middle of the night. And that right there is reflective of a collaborative experience where I've been out in Miller Park talking to somebody who's homeless, experience in terms of talking to community members and working with people. So it's not just whether it's the board of supervisors, whether it's a city council, whether it's a community-based organization, whether it's a business or a community member or a defense attorney. I have broad-based support from both sides of the aisle and work with and continue to work with public defenders, defense attorneys, judges, people in probation. And I think that's reflective of the fact that the probation department has endorsed me as well. And it's reflective of the fact that community members such as Nicole Clavel and Mervyn Brookins and others who work in the community have endorsed me, because I work well with many different people.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask a question now. So the Los Angeles County District Attorney, George Gascon, promised when he was elected that his office would no longer seek the death penalty, would no longer seek life sentences without the possibility of parole, and that his office would not try juveniles as adults, any juveniles. These promises have been controversial. Equally controversial have been the diversion policies of San Francisco DA Chesa Boudin, who has, according to the San Francisco Chronicle, sent a greater percentage of robbery, assault, and drug cases into diversion programs than previous DAs. For each of you, do you agree with these specific policies? And I know, so I'm trying to anticipate some answers like, well, I don't want to look at San Francisco or LA. It's not looking at San Francisco or LA in this case. It's the specific policies that I want you to comment on. do you believe in having a blanket statement that you will not prosecute any juveniles? Will you seek the death penalty as a DA? Will you seek life without the possibility of parole, the DA? And would you be more aggressive on diversion programs for robbery, assault, and drug cases? So let's start with Thien Ho. Thien Ho, you have 3 minutes.
Sure. Thank you for asking that question. I believe that blanket policies across the board, when you say you won't do X, Y, and Z, I think they are bad policy. In regards to juveniles, and I want to give an example of prosecuting a juvenile as an adult. In regards to that, I have prosecuted juveniles who were 17 years old and committed a homicide, killed somebody who was sitting in a wheelchair suffering from MS. And I prosecuted that individual as an adult. But remember this, when we prosecute a juvenile as an adult for most violent crimes such as rape and murder, there's a judge and there's a psychiatrist and there's a process that is reviewed and approved by the court before that is done. We just don't get to do that on our own. And so I've done that, and in the right circumstances, in the right situation, I believe that it's appropriate to do with court supervision on it. In regards to life without the possibility of parole and the death penalty, I prosecuted a person, Joseph D'Angelo, who killed 13 people, raped upwards of 50 people, committed 120 different burglaries. And I prosecuted people who were sentenced, who raped little children, 7 and 8-year-old little kids. And I prosecuted and tried those cases in the courtroom, not as a court trial, but as a jury trial in front of a judge and a jury, and obtained convictions on those. And I believe that public safety and those violent crimes is paramount, and we must have accountability. When we have changes in these policies, we need to be able to consult with victims, talk with victims, make sure that their voices are heard. These are the survivors of crimes. These are the people that had the fabric of their lives torn apart. And so when we make policy decisions, we need to talk to victims. And that's why, I helped co-found the Voices for Victims Coalition to make sure they had a voice. That's why I'm endorsed by Crime Victims United to make sure that they had a voice. And in regards to alternative programs, I'm all for alternative programs, but we have to make sure that there's accountability and that there's public safety involved. In the DA's office, for example, we have alternative programs, and I'll tell you one of them. In regards to Veterans Treatment Court, where you have a veteran who's suffering because of the service that they gave to our country from a mental health or psychiatric condition that causes them directly to commit a particular crime. And so that Veterans Court, we have a mentorship. And for statistics wise, we have an 83% success rate in Veterans Court, where those cases are dismissed after they go through the program, have the mentorship, get the treatment that they need. 83% success rate. That's something that we're doing in this office. But you know what? When it comes to public safety, we always need to make sure that the reform or the changes are reasonable and not reckless, and that we always make sure that the voices of victims are heard.
Thank you very much. So Alana Mathews, would you support a blanket not prosecuting any juveniles as adults? Would you seek the death penalty as the DA? And would you seek life without the possibility of parole as the DA? You have 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. So let me start with the juvenile question. I've always looked at this from the point of rehabilitation, but I think it's important to look at this from the point of accountability. And so I don't think there are blanket policies that are going to serve any DA well. So in certain circumstances where it is appropriate, I think juveniles can be tried as an adult. But I think those are very rare and particular circumstances that the DA needs to look at and not have a blanket policy. And I've come to that conclusion after speaking, listening to a victim and a mom who's lost her son, and the person who perpetrated that crime was tried as a juvenile, and they're looking to be released fairly soon. And there has not been any accountability because that person is still bragging about that. And the conversations that I've had with her and just seeing of how we may be in a situation where a juvenile will be released and they're going to commit further harm into the community. So we have to look at what's appropriate in each case. For the death penalty, I do not support seeking that at this time. I think our system is not only ineffective, but there's racial disparities. So that even in the most egregious crime, as my opponent just mentioned, the Golden State Killer, if anybody was deserving of that form of punishment, I believe it was that individual, but yet he was not. And so I think until we have a system where it can be applied, fairly, it hasn't been shown to be effective. It costs a lot of money, and it is not a deterrent on crime. With regard to diversion programs, what I am hearing from defense attorneys is that the diversion programs are not very successful here in Sacramento County. We have a lot of them, and we have a statistic of 83%, but how many individuals does that actually represent? How many went through the court? And what number is that actually represented? Because when I walked among those who were experiencing homelessness, a lot of them were veterans, and they didn't have the opportunity to go through that program. So what I hear time and time again from overwhelmingly, whether they're public defenders or they're the defense bar, is that these diversion programs are a slow plea. People are not eligible to become a part of the diversion programs, and these are for low-level offenses. And then when they get into the program, it's not set up for them to be successful. It's just a slow plea to incarceration, and we're not actually preventing and intervening crime. I think diversion should be reserved for low-level offenders, but serious and violent offenders should be vigorously prosecuted and held accountable.
Great, thank you very much. We're going to go a bit out of order here. We're ad-libbing a little bit. So I will go back to our friend and editor, Colleen Nelson, who has a reader question. Colleen?
Thanks. This question comes from Stephanie Carras in Sacramento. And Stephanie's question is, currently the DA's office enjoys a great deal of immunity from civil liability, and many decisions are made behind closed doors. As the new district attorney, what will you do to create better accountability and transparency about the decisions made by the DA's office? And Alana Mathews, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So I intend to have a data dashboard. So that opens up the transparency of the DA's office so that every person that we are charging, what we're charging with them with, that has been done in earlier other jurisdictions. So I would adopt that model as well to have greater transparency. Additionally, I want to say that I want to be more present in the community. I find it ironically that we have a community prosecution unit, but there's still ideas being floated around of creating an advisory board to have more community engagement, where you would think we have the structure in place to already be doing that. And so there's a reason why there hasn't been transparency in the DA's office and things have been done behind closed doors. I think we ought to be more present in the community, not building fences, but building bridges. And we don't have to wait to have an advisory board where we just have a select few people whose names we can put out there and say, oh, we've talking with them, we're working with them. I want to be more present in the community. So having town halls, having regular meetings, going out into the community and understanding how they experience the safety. And not only is that important to introduce who the DA is and what the DA does, but it builds trust in the community. And why is that important? Because when really bad people do really bad things, we need the community to come forward. Those are your witnesses. Those are your corroborators. Those are the people that we are needing to rely on to collaborate and have a partnership to keep all of us safe. And so it's important to have that transparency so that we build that trust. So when we need them, it's already there. And then we don't want the worst day of someone's life is the first time they're learning about who the DA's office is and what the DA's office does. We want to make sure that we are working with the community. That's why I want to start a crime strategies unit where we actually look and target what is the crime and victimization trends in each community so that we plot that out. Not only that we understand that, but we have a multidisciplinary team so that we're not only working with law enforcement and DAs, but we're working with psychology. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tinho will send the same question to you.
Absolutely. So I absolutely believe in transparency. And part of that transparency in terms of openness is that relationship in the community. For the last 20 years as a prosecutor, I've had that relationship, being out in the community, working with the community. And I think that's really important to establish that relationship so that the community understands what it is that we're doing and why we do what we do. So one of the things that we have is we have a We Connect program where our young attorneys and our attorneys are embedded and work with the community-based organizations and community groups so that you have that relationship. And one of the things with our community prosecution unit, and I've been at multiple town hall meetings recently in regards, especially since COVID is open, but before that we had a transition with Zoom, and before that we were out in the community. Our attorneys, community prosecutors, actually work in the community. Our offices are in the community. We walk in the community, work with the community, talk with the community. And I've been out there talking to the community about all the issues that they face, whether it's gun violence, whether it's the homeless crisis, whether it's drug and mental health. Those are the things that we need to do and continue to do to really create that transparency, that relationship, so that we can really inform the public about what we do. And programs such as our Youth Academy, our Citizens Academy, which we've done now for over a decade, where we're working and engaging with different people in the community.
Great. Thank you very much. Producers, we're going to go to Yusuf Beg next. Yusuf Beg, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Marcos. Obviously, we're running short on time, but I'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the K Street shooting that occurred in our community just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, there's a lot of threads that have come off of it as the investigation reporting has unfolded. But I'd like to hear from each of you, and I know, Thien, that you're limited in what you can say on this, but how you would sort of respond to this situation and how you would bring the community together, obviously recognizing the need for Sacramento to heal after this. And Thien, let's start with you for 2 minutes.
Sure. So let me address it. First of all, there's actually a rule of professional conduct. I just want to inform the viewers that really prevent prosecutors from talking about a pending case or a pending investigation because there are certain due process rights. And frankly, I think that rule should apply to candidates who are running for district attorney as well, because that is the position that's involved. But so I want to address in general, if I can, in regards to gun violence and shootings and what have you. We've seen an uptick in gun violence. We've seen an uptick, and it's tragic anytime that there is a loss in life. But one of the great things that we have in our community is, number one, the district attorney's office first responsibility is this. We need to make sure that we hold those who are responsible for committing violent crimes responsible. Those who commit violent gun offenses responsible to the fullest extent of the law. We need to continue to do that and do that well, and we will do that because the victims of crimes, especially violent crimes, deserve to have justice. They deserve to have justice, and the community deserves to feel safe. So let's start there with the accountability. But the other things that we need to work on, and we are working on, is the intervention and prevention, working with community-based organizations. And I know that when these sort of events happen, one of the things that we need to address, and that is being addressed, is there are organizations. I mentioned Nicole Clavo a moment ago. She's the manager of the City of Sacramento Violent Crime Prevention Unit. I first met Nicole several years ago when her son, JJ, was a high school football player for Grand High School, was shot and killed in a gang drive-by shooting. I was assigned to prosecute that case. And I got to meet with her, and I got to sit there and hold her hand in the most darkest, worst part of her life. And since then, she has turned tragedy into triumph. And what she continues to do in different situations and cases as well is when there are events that happen, when there are tragedies that happen, her and her team and the organizations, they're out there in the community making sure that there isn't an escalation of violence. So there's two parts. There's the accountability, the prosecution of those who commit crimes and making sure that they're held accountable. But at the same time, making sure that there is community engagement and working with the community.
Thank you, Thien. And Alana, I mean, if you were DA on the first weekend of April this year, how would your office have responded, and how would you have brought the community together in the aftermath?
Yeah, well, I think we need to look back a little bit further than that, because when we talk about accountability, again, we are reacting to a situation, but we know that oftentimes that people who have guns, who shouldn't have them, have a history of domestic violence. So it's not an accountability problem. What we're starting to see is that it's not believing women, particularly women of color, when they warn about dangerous men problem. So what we need to do is back up and see that those who are engaged in sex trafficking and domestic abuse, we need to make sure that when we have them in front of them, and we're not just saying we're going to hold them accountable, but we're actually holding them accountable for the serious violence that they have committed. And this is not something that I've read about. It's something that I've personally experienced. And so we have to make sure, particularly those communities, as I said in the beginning, we normalize crime against certain types of victims and certain types of communities. And while it was new on April 3rd to downtown Sacramento, it has not been new. My opponent has just talked about, and the leadership has focused on certain areas, Del Paso Heights. But what about those who live in Meadowview? What about those who live in Oak Park? Not only are there African Americans, who my opponent keeps talking about, but what about those in the Latino community, those in the API community? They have people who are working just as hard in the community. So what we need to do to bring us all together is recognize there's more than 3 programs and 2 people who are working on this. We need to work with everybody on prevention, but also we need to believe women when they say, I'm fearful for my life. If we're going to give them a restraining order to protect them, we need to make sure we're protecting their children as well. So what I would do differently is make sure that I'm in the community, and when violent crimes happen, we're not just talking about accountability, we're making sure we're doing it in the courtroom.
Great. I was hoping to squeeze in one more question from Robin, but we're running up against time. So why don't we finish the evening? Let's go with 90 seconds with each. This is your last opportunity to speak directly to our viewers. What would you say to them in the 90 seconds that you have left? Let's start with Alana, and we'll give Thien the last word. Alana?
What I would say to the voters of Sacramento County is that crime has been normalized in certain types of communities against certain types of victims. We have not prioritized serious and violent offenders across the board, and that's what we need to do. I have been talking to those who are most impacted by crime, and what I find is that their distrust. There's not been a presence of the DA's office. And it's really sad when an individual or an organization thinks they're actually doing it, but they're not. We're not seeing the results of community engagement. We're not seeing the results of prioritizing gun violence, because it is rampant and it is random across our region, and nobody feels safe. So what we need is somebody who has the experience, not just a title, not just a text box, a checkbox in the courtroom, but someone who's actually worked with regional leaders to bring solutions, targeted solutions to address the underlying causes of crime, but also making sure when we have violent and serious offenders, we are holding them accountable. We are believing women, and we are offering opportunities to low-level offenders so that we can prioritize the resources of law enforcement and the DA's office to more serious and violent offenders by making sure low-level offenders get diverted to treatment and services that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. And Thien, you'll get the last word. 90 seconds to make a closing statement to the viewers.
Thank you so much. For the last 20 years as a prosecutor, every time I've stood up in the courtroom, I announced Thien on behalf of the people. On behalf of the people, for the people. The district attorney is the attorney for the people, of the people, from the people, elected by the people. And so it's all people in all communities. And when you're talking about it and you see the sign behind me, it says experienced prosecutor. Tonight, as you listen to both of us, I want you to pay attention. I've provided very specific examples of what I would like to do and what I have been doing in addressing gun violence, in addressing homicides, in addressing gang violence, juvenile violence, and on top of that, our homeless crisis. I have worked with not only local leaders, but community members and organizations to deal with the homeless crisis. What's going on in terms of releases at the jail, what's going on in regards to different locations and mental health and drug addiction. I have the experience. And when you ask yourself, who do you want to hire as a lawyer to be your lawyer? I would ask that you would want somebody who has that experience, somebody who's done it for 20 years. If you're flying into Sacramento Airport and you're that pilot, you want a prosecutor who has successfully landed that plane every single time for the last 20 years. Somebody with the experience in the courtroom, in the executive room, in the classroom, in the community. And I am that person. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Thien Ho. Thank you, Alana Mathews, for being with us tonight. We want to wrap up by reminding our readers and our viewers that starting Monday, the Sacramento Bee editorial board will begin rolling out its endorsements in more than 20 races, and we aim to have that content available for our readers and for voters when ballots land on May 9th. So until then, we want to once again thank our viewers. We want to thank our candidates on behalf of Colleen Nelson, our editor, and the Sacramento Bee editorial board. We thank you for tuning in, and we wish you a very pleasant evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.